Hi everyone, this is Eldad Amara. Now I'm going to read you out an article which I had to find over the internet the other day. I haven't read it in its entirety, but I'm going to read it out to you now. Now it's quite wordy and quite long, so I'm going to break this video down into two parts. It's going to come to you in two parts. This is written by The Independent, a black journalist by the name of Gary Younge, and this is what he has to say about racism and being black in Britain today. Now this article's entitled, "No, Britain is not best place to be black. No, Britain is not the best place to be black. Journalist Gary Younge on UK's racism problem." Story by Nadine White. British journalist and author Gary Younge has hit out at Kemi Benedoc's claim that Britain is the best place to be black, saying their remarks suggest that ethnic minorities should be happy with racism we have. Wow, blacks should be happy with the racism we have. That's what it seems to be implying, says this Gary. The multi-award winner, 54, a professor of sociology at the University of Manchester, said Miss Benedoc's comments made at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester were unhelpful because they effectively ranked racism while ignoring the fact it is not very good anywhere. As during an interview with race correspondent Nadine White at Henley Literary Festival, As during an interview with race correspondent Nadine White at Henley Literary Festival, for which The Independent is an exclusive news partner, whether he thought that was right. He said evidently not. He said evidently not. According to the statistics, you are more than likely to be unemployed, less likely to earn as much, more likely to be stopped and searched, arrested, jailed, and you're going to get a longer sentence. You're more likely to be in poor housing. You're more likely to be poor. He added, it's worth saying it's not that much fun for a lot of white people either. But if we're doing pound for pound, then it's not the best country to be black. That is the nature of racism. Mr. Younge, formerly editor at large at The Guardian, which he joined in 1993, said Miss Benedoc's comments were a different way of saying that black people should be happy with racism we have because there could be more. Who would want to be happy with that? So he says, who would want to be happy with that? And how do we measure that? He asked. I don't know that any other country has deported its citizens during the Windrush scandal. Right, so he goes on, he says, I don't know that any country has deported its citizens as they did during the Windrush scandal. I haven't heard those dispatches from Holland, France, or Spain. At some point, it becomes weird, batch of auction, as if to say that where is racism better? Well, it's not very good anywhere. Mr. Younge said that the rhetoric of our racism is better than theirs. It is a very, very low standard to go on. I don't see how that helps me or anyone else. I find it an incredibly complacent and unhelpful way to think, he added. You know, during the Windrush scandals, you know how many black people were deported and had to go back to the Caribbean? I think some actually got deported to Liberia in West Africa as well. You see, when Britain, just after the war, had problems with its economy because it lost a lot of its soldiers, right, and its economy is flattened, right, they asked for the help of people from the Caribbean islands, Jamaica, Grenada, St. Lucia, yeah, Bahamas, and all of these places. So they so-called open their arms up to welcome black people into Britain. You know how hard it was for those black people when they come here? You know how hard it was? All the racism they had to endure? And how the British citizens don't even want them here? There's complaints about black people stealing their jobs and all that. There was all this stuff by Enoch Powell. And then you had signs put in windows. No blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So black people had to endure quite a lot of things when they come here at first. They had to have something called partnership because they couldn't seem to get any housing. Right? So they had to put their money together in a partnership, buy a house, allow other people to come in as tenants, other black people, and then they pooled their money together again to buy another house. That's how they managed to get onto the housing market. No banks wouldn't accept them for things like loans. They had to go through a hell of a lot of problems there. And then, anyway, they helped to build up this economy, this British economy. Then some law comes out quite recently saying that those people who hadn't had a British passport, I believe, had to go back to the Caribbean and had to go back to places like Liberia. Man, you just imagine, you have to build up an economy and next thing you're told you got to go back home after 30, 40, 50 years of being there. These people who want to say there's no racism in England, you need to ask some black people some questions, man. Seriously. You cannot, as a white person, turn around and say that you think that racism isn't, you cannot say that racism does not exist in Britain. As a white person, you cannot say that. It is not up to you to be saying all that kind of thing. Alright? We try to say that we're living in a so-called equal society. Who told you that? You want to go and speak, be the mouthpiece for black people, but you should be asking black people these questions. Number two, you should be looking at all the statistics and seeing in terms of housing, in terms of employment, in terms of medical care, yeah, in terms of migration and all of these other issues, schools, universities and all the rest of it. Get these statistics together and also ask some black people, do some primary research and ask some black people, yeah, from different parts of the country how they feel about racism, whether it's improving or not. It should not be for the voice of someone who's white to be turned around and saying, I don't think there's any racism anymore. That's archaic. It doesn't exist anymore. How do you know that? Where are you getting your information from? I'll read on anyway. Mr. Younge discussed, among other topics, his latest book, Dispatches from Diaspora, From Nelson Mandela to Black Lives Matter. Described as a powerful collection of journalism on race, racism, black life, and death. Dispatches from the Diaspora is based on journalist articles on those topics, and the New State to GQ magazine, Washington Post, and The Nation. The decision to comply dispatches from Diaspora followed by George Floyd's murder in the USA in 2020. Floyd's murder made me think about the kind of work that I done and how it kind of did or didn't relate to that moment, he said. I thought we are in a weird time where it's all available, or most of what's in the book is kind of available on the internet, but then you will have to look for it, blah blah blah, and there was some value in having it in one place. So I started thinking about collecting the works. there are trends and continuity, and there are things that are happening now. History doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it does rhyme. He said he wanted to demonstrate that racism didn't start in 2020. No, it didn't, did it? It started centuries and centuries ago. Once I had the idea, that was where I thought there is more value in this than I had originally imagined, he said. From covering the end of apartheid in South Africa during the 1990s to reporting on the ground in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the inception of Black Lives Matter movement, to the impact of COVID on the black communities. Young dispatches interrogate political and social assumptions around blackness. The body of work spans the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, Britain, translating key moments into tangible words, and further chronicle them onto pages of history. Let me just quickly say something. During 2020, right, when we had the BAP, the cocktail, one of the first groups of people they were trying to get to take the cocktail, the BAP, were black people. Why was this? Out of all racial groups, they tried to get black people to take the BAP first. They said they were more vulnerable. Is this true? Or is it not true? We're going to find out sometime in the future about all of this. Because I would like to know myself personally why they wanted black people to take the BAP. Number 2, during 2020, 2021, with this Colston, this Edward Colston in Bristol, the statue there was pulled down and then it took a watery grave, yeah? It was chucked over a bridge into the water, okay? Now, I got to ask people, I don't quite understand why people would want to do that. In some ways, I could understand people's anger. In some ways, I could understand people's anger. They have to walk past the statue every single day. And it's a reminder of what happened during the times of slavery. But let me also ask this as well. There's another thing. That Colson obviously made quite a lot of money through the slave trade. But if you take the statue down, and you were to take down every single statue around Britain that represented slavery, what would you put in its place? If you remove these statues, what would be left for your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, to remind them of the past and what happened to a lot of black people? Would it not have been better to leave the statues up, to put a placard with the true history, the true facts of what this person stood for, so that generations and generations and generations, right, would remember what had happened in the past, rather than taking their statue down and then you've got no recording of what happened in past history. That is just my perspective on this. Since you pull down the statue and some of these other monuments all around the country, can you ask me this, has racism improved? Has racism improved? Would it not have been better to leave these monuments up, put a placard and state what this person really stood for? Okay? The true facts. That's just me. Let's move on. Black Lives Matter was funded by a guy called George Soros. If none of you have ever heard of this guy. Black Lives Matter was funded by George Soros. Alright? Now this guy is a philanthropist. Okay? And he's been putting his money into various different types of charities. Now, I got to ask you, this Black Lives Matter, in which he put his money into, other groups have come along and have steamed over this thing. They come along and they've actually steamed over the Black Lives Matter because they have their own agenda. So this Black Lives Matter and the money that's been poured into that, has it really reached the community that it's supposed to be reaching? The communities that it's supposed to be reaching? And the other thing is, you got people with this symbolism, they're getting down onto one knee, yeah, with their hand pointed up towards the sky. How is this improving anything in terms of racism? You're saying about these groups of people standing together and fighting racism on a football pitch. They've got people doing it, bending down on one knee, yeah, with their hand up in the air. How is this stopping racism? Because there's still racism going on within football matches. Look what ex-footballer from Jamaica, who also played for England, John Barnes, has had to go through. The monkey chanting. And bananas being thrown onto the pitch. Ian Wright, he also had the same thing. And other black footballers, and it's still going on today. And not only in England, but in other countries. When English footballers are going to other countries, they're getting the monkey chant. And they're getting bananas thrown onto the pitch. And being called by the N-word. So when we've got certain journalists and we've got certain politicians who are whites from England turn around and saying that racism has improved, who are they to turn around and say something like that? It's like their voice, they're speaking for other people. Let the people speak for themselves. That's the end of part 1. And now we're going to come on to part 2.